Hi, this is Mike at Gamefromscratch, and welcome to This Week in Game Dev for weeks 14 and 15. That's for the weeks concluding February the 21st and February the 28th. Sorry for doing a twofer on you. I actually was away on vacation last weekend, so I got to do both of them together. Now, on the bright side, not a whole lot happened in that first week, but boy, did we get some doozies this week. So there's some interesting stuff here, but it won't be too long because not a lot happened in that first week. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Now, every story we're going to talk about here, I actually have a link to a little bit more in depth on Gamefromscratch. So if you want to read more about it, scroll down into the comments down below, and I will have a link for every story we're about to see. Okay, so let's go. We're going to start from basically February the 14th-ish up. And on February the 15th, we saw a new release of the Spring RTS engine. Now, Spring is kind of a special guy because it is a real-time strategy focused game engine. You can almost think of it as a stock implementation of a real-time strategy game and a very generic implementation of an engine, so you can adapt it to work with other games. But as you can see here, like hovercrafts are a type built into it, so it's very RTS focused, but it is completely open source. It's definitely something worth checking out. And as I said, there was just a release candidate 3, and then just a couple days ago, release candidate 2. So I grouped them both together. Next up, probably the big news from the previous week is Vulkan finally arrived. Now, if you've never heard of it, Vulkan is from the Kronos Group. And the Kronos Group is the people responsible for the development of OpenGL. You can sort of think of Vulkan as the replacement for OpenGL, sort of. Essentially what it is, and why I say that is you normally shouldn't expect new functionality in OpenGL. It's pretty much going to be maintenance release from now on, and Vulkan is the next step. And for developers, depending on where you are in the tool chain or the food chain, Vulkan is either a great thing or a gigantic pain in your butt, and you're going to decide probably going forward. Now, the nice thing is, hardware itself has changed. We've gone from being building special functions into the silicon, so that's kind of the way it used to work. We would build functions in for like draw a triangle, draw a textured triangle, draw a transparent triangle, mix these two colors together, etc. We would build all these different functions into the silicon of the chips themselves, and then the driver would expose it, and then in turn OpenGL would access the driver to make these things happen. So every time a video card manufacturer added new functionality, they had to add it to their drivers, get it put into the OpenGL or DirectX standard, and it took years to get to market, if ever. And we sort of slowly moved away from that to the programmable pipeline. And what that basically means is the silicon now does a lot of very, 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 very small, quick actions, and we've created this general purpose GPU type programming interfaces for them. Well, DirectX 12 and Vulkan both take that a step further. Basically, it's a very, very, very low level programming language for GPU development. And for the most part, depends on if you're creating a game engine, you're going to have to get to know Vulkan, and you're going to find Vulkan is going to be a gigantic pain in the ass, because what used to take you 20 lines of code is now going to take you 150, because you have to do more. It doesn't provide as much. You have to roll things yourself. There's much more involved. However, it's also a lot faster, and hardware can advance to the point where it's not tied or tethered to the software. Vulkan actually came out of AMD's project Mantle, which was kind of like iOS and Apple's Metal. Well, there's too many M's going on here, but basically AMD created this low-level framework and then open sourced it, and then the Kronos Group kind of ran with it and turned it into Vulkan, which is now here. So going forward, we're going to actually see Vulkan implementation in Unity, Unreal, etc. And probably 1st Gen, you're actually not going to see much of an improvement. Same with DirectX 12, essentially. As things start coming out, it's not going to be that much faster, but as new generations of hardware come out, or as the implementations in the game engines get better, we should see, and the numbers I've heard are 30 to 50% increases in speed on the same silicon. So it should definitely bring higher frame rates eventually. Just don't expect any magic overnight. And if you're a developer all excited about working in Vulkan, like you would be, say, working or making a demo project in OpenGL, I do want to tether your expectations. It's not a great programming experience for the most part. But definitely check it out. It is the future, as is DirectX 12, so they're definitely of interest, especially if you are creating a game engine. So let's carry on. Hax Flixel version 4 was released. Flixel was a Flash-based game engine or game library, and it hasn't been developed in years, to be honest, but it was very popular, and there's a Hax-based port of it. and it's been ongoing development, which is nice to see. So they're modifying their API, improving HTML5 support, improving OpenFL Next compatibility. OpenFL is the underlying tech layer it depends on for a lot of the functionality, etc. So it's a nice, mature release with a little bit more functionality, but it is nice to see continued development there, especially with Flixel itself not getting any. And on the topic of hacks-based game engines, SnowKit also saw a new release. Now, SnowKit's one of those things I intend to cover, but haven't. And it is another hacks-based 2D game engine. It's developing pretty rapidly. It sounds pretty interesting. They give you the ability now to call SDL code directly, which is somewhat interesting. So if the engine doesn't do what you need, you should still be good to go. And in a platform independent way. So if you're a hacks developer looking for a game engine, definitely consider checking out SnowKit as well. And again, they just released Alpha 2. And continuing the game release theory, game engine releases, we have Phaser 2.4.5. Now, Phaser is a great game engine. I love it. It's an HTML5 based game engine. I have an entire Phaser with TypeScript tutorial series on Gamefromscratch. I've also done a video or two about making games in Phaser, and it is probably my favorite HTML5 game engine. And we're getting to the point where things are winding down. They're not doing a whole lot of new stuff because the next version, Laser, which is Phaser 3, is actively in development. So they're sort of starting to transition off the Phaser train and going on to the Laser train a bit more. So Phaser's about to hit the long-term support stage of its life, which basically means bug fixes from this point on. But so this is going to be one of the last releases of Phaser that we're going to see. But on the other hand, Phaser is also incredibly mature. And don't worry, it's not being abandoned. Obviously, Laser is coming next. But new release of Phaser 2.45, cool to see. Next up, we have Coppercube 5.4 release. Now, Coppercube is sort of like a WYSIWYG editor built over top of the Coppercube game engine. So it's an HTML5 3D game engine, and this is an HTML5 editor that's built over top of it. So it's a neat combo. One is free. The underlying engine is free. The editor costs money. It's definitely worth checking out. This engine adds a couple things. Height map support, which is kind of cool for importing, for making terrain out of a height map. Texture packer built in, smaller compressed files for WebGL, smoother first-person style camera, full-page WebGL support. So very cool stuff was added in this particular release. Next up, we have Corona released version 2016.2830. And Corona is a Lua-based game engine. You've probably heard a lot about them because they were acquired by a company called Perk a few weeks back, and since then they've done a lot of releases. But we've got this new release. A lot of it is simulator-based, and then incremental stuff, like the Android now supports Marshmallow, iOS device support 9.2, 3D touch support was added, etc. So it's just kind of an incremental release going on there. And Xamarin. Xamarin is a company that makes C# or .NET implementations for iOS and Android, who is going to be included in a news story in a couple of minutes. That's huge, but in a much smaller news story, they just released Skia Sharp. Now, Skia is a library by Google that powers Chrome's rendering and Android's rendering. So basically, it's sort of an SDL-like library. Well, they created a C#-based wrappings around it. It's game appropriate. It should be a good performance going on. I don't particularly know why you would choose Skia over SDL or OpenGL. I don't know why you wouldn't either. I just don't know the specifics, to be honest. But that's basically what it bills itself as. Now, the next biggest piece of news on the week. Actually, let's go to another rather inconsequential, no offense to Marmalade, piece of news, and then we'll get to the two biggies. So Marmalade just released version 8.2.1. Big things here is they added WatchKit and 3D touch support on iOS devices. And in case you've never heard of it, Marmalade is one of the older cross-platform mobile-based game engines out there, C++ based, but there's also Marmalade Quick, which I believe is built around the Qt's Lua-based layer for rapid creation of games. So that's definitely a piece of news, but the big ones are coming next. Now, probably the smaller of the two big ones is the Godot engine. Finally hit release 2.0. Now, if you're into it, I did a complete video on what's new in Godot Engine 2.0. A lot of it's workflow related, some definite improvements. I'll link the video down below as well. It's an incremental increase. There's not any huge major new features, but the workflow is definitely improved. And the big thing is probably your ability to traverse between scenes a lot better or edit scenes directly. So a definite improvement on Godot with the release of 2.0. But by far and away, the last 2 weeks' biggest news is one I've been waiting for years, but it finally happened. Microsoft bought Xamarin. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, Xamarin is the technology company that makes the piece that allows you to run .NET on iOS and Android. There's more to it than that. They obviously make Xamarin Studio, which is a .NET-based IDE for, sorry, a C# IDE. It's available on Windows, Linux, and Macintosh or Apple OS. Mac OS, sorry. But basically, Xamarin is the .NET for iOS and Android guys. And Microsoft kind of competed with them a little bit early on, then sort of got in bed with them as, they started supporting more platforms. And now Microsoft is a much different company than they were a few years ago. And they've picked up Xamarin. I also did a video on this acquisition. I'll link it as well. So if you want a little bit more details, I do have a video that goes into it a bit. But this could potentially be a huge move. As a side note, Xamarin just recently purchased RoboVM, which is the technology we use to run libGDX apps on iOS too. And my money says that the end result of this is that Xamarin will be incorporated into Visual Studio Community, which means for those of us making less than $1 million a year, it basically will now be free. So it used to be $400 or $500 a month for the one version. So huge cost savings for people working in a number of C# based game engines. And Xamarin is used to target mobile on a lot of them. Wave Engine, Paradox/Zenko. Come on, brain. Okay, it's not working. Mono Game, etc. These are all using Xamarin for mobile targeting. So it's a huge development for C# developers looking at targeting mobile. Microsoft has a MS Build conference coming up in about a month. So that's where I would expect to hear more announcements about how this is going to turn out. So the only real question mark is what happens to RoboVM. And I think in the end will be good. Microsoft really is in a huge space in the Java area, but they've also gone really out of their way to not piss off open source developers lately. So I can't see them doing anything overly toxic there. I think worst case scenario, they would spin it out as another open source project, basically where it was 4 months ago, and life goes on. So I don't think at the end of the day this is a bad move in any ways, but I guess we're going to have to wait and see. But that was definitely the big news from the last 2 weeks. Not necessarily game related, but it ties into a whole lot of game developers. And who knows what that's actually going to have an effect on Unity, because the version of C# that's bundled in Unity is from the Stone Ages. So hopefully this kind of gets them to upgrade and move on a bit. Now there's a bunch of other things going on. Unity uses something called IL to CPP already as their conversion layer, and so they're tied to their implementation of .NET or C# pretty heavy at this point. So who knows where that one's going to go, but still definitely an interesting development. Sorry, I lost my ability to speak. And it'll be interesting to see exactly how this one turns out. I think being in Microsoft hands is a no-brainer. I've been waiting for this acquisition for years now, so it's nice to finally be here. And to be honest, Xamarin makes great tech. It's just always been a little hard to justify that price tag, especially in a world where so many tools are now free. So we're probably going to have yet another free tool. So that is the news for the last 2 weeks. Sorry about the delay in the middle there. I hope it was worth listening. See you later.